Hey, Mom and Dad, do you know the difference between a tantrum and a meltdown? Because they look the same on the outside. It's screaming, it's tears, it's flaying around, the ever popular ragdoll on the floor routine. But they're driven by two different things. And as wise parents, we want to know the difference because one of them requires some discipline and some training, and the other one requires compassion. And we need to be able to tell the difference between the two. Okay, let's go ahead and break it down. Tantrums are on purpose. They're manipulative by nature and they're designed to wear you down. It doesn't matter what caused it, but there is a trigger for a tantrum. It might be that you said no more cookies or no more popcorn, that it's time for bath, that they have to leave the park, whatever it is, but everything was going great, and then all of a sudden, boom, tantrum. That's the telltale sign, is that there was a trigger and you asked them to do something they didn't want to do. Now, the nice thing about tantrums is generally they're pretty short-lived because it's triggered by an event and you either let them get away with it and you cave and you give in to them, or you don't, but it's basically a war and that war ends. So it's not something that is out of their control. They're fully doing this on purpose. And I'm going to tell a quick story. I'll give you the time code if you want to skip ahead of it. But the perfect example in our family was a tantrum was Michael. And my son, Michael, he was our firstborn. He was 2, and we knew that he was going to throw his first public tantrum because we watched him watch other kids do it. And so we knew it was getting it in that little mind of his. And so Cheryl and I, we made a covenant. And our covenant was this. It says, we are not going to handle tantrums. We're not going to do that as a family. So the first time Michael tries it, what we're going to do is no matter when and no matter how inconvenient, we're going to pack our stuff, go home, take Michael home, discipline him, and then come straight back to where we were. And that's exactly what we did. Michael was at Barnes & Noble. He loved playing with those trains. And I said, it's time to go. And here we go. Michael says, no. Looks me square in the eye and says, no. And I says, Michael, we need to go. And if we don't, I'm going to bring you home and I'm going to discipline you and you're probably never going to forget it. And I said, it's super soft, right? Because it's more scary that way. Well, anyways, he threw the fit that was like Academy Award winning. Meryl Streep would have been proud, okay? He sold it to the cheap seats. I wound up carrying him out of Barnes & Noble over my shoulder like he was a board. He was stiff as a board and he wouldn't cooperate. Drove him home, we disciplined him, told him we were not going to take that kind of behavior. And I drove him all the way back to Barnes & Noble. We walked back to the back of the store. I put him in front of the trains and I says, Michael, go ahead and play with the trains. And he played for a couple of minutes. I sat down it was lucky, it was the same chair. And I says, okay, Michael, it's time to leave. And he put the train down, put his hand out, and we walked out hand in hand. And that actually worked. We didn't know what we were doing at the time, but we just figured, well, we'll try this because I don't want to deal with tantrums. And Michael never threw another tantrum. And Lucas and Chase never threw a tantrum ever because they knew the story about Michael. So they knew that tantrums weren't going to work in our family. So tantrums can be dealt with if you're intentional about it and you're willing to be inconvenienced on that first one. And it may take 1 or 2 tries or 3 tries. I don't know, your kid's different than mine. But that's a tantrum. It's willful and it's triggered. Meltdowns, however, are a different story. So meltdowns in general are more physical and biological than they are willful. So it's not like I'm going to get in a bad mood. They just are in a bad mood. And so every child, just like every parent, has this like, man, I can only go this far, and then things are going to start to get dicey. So for kids, it's being out of their schedule, missing a nap, being hungry, just overstimulated. And what's happened is their body and their mind has basically become hijacked, and they don't really have emotional regulation. They just know they feel just out of it, and they're angry and they're tired and they just want to cry and yell. Well, that is not a disciplinary issue. That's a fact that, hey, you know what? We need to get this kid home. We need to get him quiet and calm down. And some families I know that I've talked with have said, hey, we are just not going to tolerate that type of misbehavior. Well, it's not really misbehavior. If you teach a child just, hey, we will never take any type of negative emotions, what you're really teaching is repression. And as they just stuff those feelings, and by the time they're 20 or 30 years old, they've never learned how to handle negative or strong negative emotions. Well, that creates a whole host of different problems that are potentially a lot worse than just having a meltdown at Walmart. So a good story for that, and this is really quick, is Chase. He was just having one of those days. He was exhausted. And I remember one of the things we did is we gave him a cookie. And he was sitting in Michael's lap, and he was just crying. And Michael was holding him and trying to pet him. It was really precious. And Chase he's crying. And then he's taking a bite of his cookie. And then crying, taking a bite of his cookie. And so he was eating a cookie, but he was crying because he felt like crying. And so we just went with it. And before you know it, he's finished with his cookie. He cried it out, and he's back to normal. So what you have there is a different cause. I don't know what was causing Chase that day to be dysregulated, but he was. But the way that we handled it is different. That's not a disciplinary problem. If this is helpful to you, would you go ahead and like and hit the share button and all the other buttons below and maybe leave a comment or something like that? That would really help us out, and I'd appreciate that. So let's talk about how you handle a tantrum and a meltdown. Because in essence, the behavior is about the same, but the cause is different. They're almost identical the way we deal with them, but with the tantrum, you have a part that requires some discipline and some training, because, hey, we're not going to do the tantrum thing, but we still want to calm you down. So the very first thing that you do is you find a quiet place. And so I always picture that kid in Walmart who's just blowing his top, right? And everybody's seen it. It's uncomfortable for everybody. And so the best thing to do, like if you're at Walmart, take your cart to the front, ask one of the cashiers and say, hey, I'm going to be back, while your kid is screaming on your shoulder. They're going to appreciate you going out to the car, right? So you go ahead and go out to the car and say, oh man, hey, I can see that you're really, really mad. I'm going to pretend I'm mom here. I can see you're really mad at mommy. Are you mad? I go, yeah, I am mad. So are you mad because I wouldn't buy you that toy? And he says, yeah, I'm mad because you wouldn't buy me that toy. I says, oh, I can see why you'd be mad. And I will bet you're a little bit sad too, because you probably wanted it. Yeah. And they'd say yes. So then you would ask them, so what is it that you're feeling? You're sad and you're mad? And they go, yes, I'm sad and I'm mad. Now, this is the oldest trick in the book, but it's neurologically sound. There is science that backs this up. There's studies for it. I'll reference it below. When you talk to a kid about his emotions, they move from feeling emotions to thinking about their emotions. And as soon as you do that, it moves their brain from using the amygdala part, that's the animal part in the brain, and it moves it towards the front, towards the prefrontal cortex, which is the reasoning part of the brain. And they don't know you're doing it, but that's exactly what's going on, and it really works. So you want to get them someplace calm and quiet. And you got to remember, if the kid's throwing a tantrum, they want an audience because they're trying to embarrass you. So you want to take that card out of their hand and make sure that they can't play the embarrassment card. Now, the next part is probably obvious, but it needs to be said because it's easy to say, it's not easy to do. And that's basically, you just have to stay calm, because their emotional thermostat is tied to yours. And if you're getting amped up, they're going to get amped up too. They can't help it. So you have to stay calm as much as you possibly can and just realize, look, this is a 3-year-old I'm dealing with, and I'm not going to get bent out of shape myself because it's just going to make things worse. So you stay calm, and then if you can, you want to bring some type of comfort. Like with Chase, we had that cookie. That really worked. But again, comfort would be maybe taking them out to the car. You can put soft music on. If you're at home, you can give them one of their toys. You can bring that toy to Walmart, by the way. Put a show on. Let them watch whatever they want to watch. But you just want to get them so that they're not responding to their emotions and that their brain starts getting involved again with something else, because that will help tamp down those negative emotions. So I want to take a second and bring this up. You want to be effective. You don't want to try and be efficient, because you cannot rush your kid calming themselves down. It's going to take some time. Let the process kind of move naturally and let their temperature come down at the rate that it wants to come down. That's going to be very helpful, because if you try and rush it, it might end up making it worse. And the final step in handling them is, after everything's calmed down and maybe after baths and everything like that, later on in the day, you can actually do a debrief. And you just ask your child, and when they're 3, this is going to be very simple. It's going to be 2 sentences. So what happened? And then what do you think you could do next time? Was it helpful to throw that tantrum in the store? And they're probably saying no. Now, is that going to stop the next tantrum when they're 3? No, it's not going to, probably. But if they're 7, it might, because now you can actually start talking to them more about how they handle their own emotions. And what you're teaching them slowly, if you start this early, is that emotions are something that happen to us, but they don't control us. We get to make a choice while we're having those negative emotions. And so you can start teaching that at 2 and 3 and 4. And hopefully by the time they're 6 and 7, they're going to start having some emotional regulation that's built into their lives because they've had some practice. Dealing with tantrums is hard. Nobody can tell you that's anything different. And it just grates on you when it's happening to you, because it grates on you when it's happening to someone else and you just feel sorry for them. But it's a challenge for parenting. But if you know the difference between a tantrum and a meltdown, it gives you the ability to actually address really what's going on and to do some things that are preventative. One is addressing a discipline problem, and the other one is just trying to help with the environment to calm them down. And so it's a great privilege to get to be a parent. And one of the things we get to do is we get to be there for our kids when they're having a really hard time. And it's a blessing if we handle that right and if we handle that well. And we just love our kids and we just help them through hard times. And that's a great way to handle a difficult situation. Okay, if this is helpful, hit like and subscribe. See you next week.